Grail switches from one form to another, it assumes things that are necessary. So what is the current form of the Grail? Based on our research, the current form of the Grail is illness. It is overall illness in every single form. What today we call disease, what today we think about as always something that's negative, as something that is holding us back from really reaching those evolutionary states. But in reality, in many cases, illness is actually a stepping point. It's actually, when treated in a certain way, illness becomes the way that we springboard into a new level of evolutionary growth. Why is that? Because when you think about it, and if you go and you look at nature, how is it that we have new variants? How do we have new parts or new types of species? It always starts with a mutation. It always starts with something that's happening in a certain way. An animal has a series of characteristics. A plant has a certain way that its form is happening. It's always something that's intact, that is carrying out its function, that's moving forward in its own way. And then at some point, a mutation happens. And that mutation usually is there to fill a need, right? There's a need of something that's happening in the ecosystem. And the mutation sort of goes there to adapt to that different need in the ecosystem. And then if that mutation is good for the ecosystem, then over time, that mutation becomes stronger and stronger and stronger, and we end up with a new variant. We see this all the time in bird species and plants. Through the course of evolutionary history, we've been able to really see this looking outside of the human form. When we look at the plants and the microbes and the animals, we often can see very easily that there are mutations that turn into new species or new characteristics of a species. So if you have a plant, for example, that's growing in very hot territory, and it was originally a shade plant, little by little variations and mutations happen to the plant to allow the plant to adapt to the new conditions. So where conditions were once super shaded or maybe very wet, over time, a plant is able to adapt its physical being in order to accept more sun. And with each generation, these are generational changes. So we're talking about slow changes that are fraught with different types of experimentations, and some of them even fail. So in the course of this mutation, as a plant is adapting itself from being something that has been used to a shadier type of climate to something that is used to a plant that's used to now a much more sunny climate, there have been casualties. There have been deaths. There have been strange mutations that maybe didn't take. There's maybe some mutations that only last one generation. But these mutations really allow the fact that the plant is now able to adapt. And today what we see is a plant that is able to be, for example, outdoors in the sun, and vice versa. Many of our original house plants, such as, for example, the spider plant, a very simple plant, simple in the sense of something that we know very well because many people have spider plants at home, is originally a tropical plant, which means that when humans started to bring that plant indoors, the plant had to evolve. The plant, and there was probably many casualties, many emanations of that plant died. But because the plant itself knows that life is much more than the single emanation that is happening in that moment, that single expression of life in the moment, but that there's a bigger picture that is connected to the way the roots sprout. It's connected to the fact that plants can pass on information so that it can tell a neighboring plant, hey, this mutation that I just tried is not working, so therefore I'm going to die off, but you try a new experimentation, right? Try a different direction with your mutation. And so therefore, the plant that started off really being a tropical plant that was meant for full sun and being outside, over the course of generations and of a co-created relationship with humans, basically working with humans by being indoors, is able to then create the environment and create the conditions physical to be able to adapt to the fact that indoors there's less light, that there's less humidity, that there's less sun, all these different aspects. And now you have a plant, the spider plant, that thrives indoors. And it thrives because of these mutations. But for us as humans, it's very difficult to see this process because this process is long and slow. And we as a species tend to think in quick intervals. We tend to think about it in our young lives. We tend to think about it the fact that we're actually a young species. And we tend to think about the fact that we're one, in the sense that we don't remember what it was like to have Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthal and Homo denison and all these different Homo species simultaneously living in the planet. We, as a much more aggressive species, as Homo sapiens, are used to being considered, at least we consider ourselves, the dominant species. And when we think of ourselves as the dominant species, we act with the idea that anything that is outside of what we currently picture as our species being is something that is negative. It is something that needs to be eliminated. It is something that needs to be fixed and corrected. Hence why today we are in a period of society where the Grail is embracing illness. It's taking on that form because it wants us to see that illness is not always the negative piece that we are looking at it, but instead it's a chance for evolution. It's a chance for co-creation, and it's a chance for us to build our physical structures and our human structures as well as other structures around us in a way for growth and a way for change and a way for evolution. Because right now, the conversation that we're having relating to the planet is so much about conservation, which I get it. It's scary to think about all the species that we're losing, the amount of species that we're losing in the amount of time that we've been losing them. It's something that's very unprecedented. But it's not unusual for many species to go extinct. We know the long list of species that have gone extinct over the centuries, over those 3.8 billion years of evolution. We know many species have been created, lived in a period of time, and then have gone extinct for lots of different reasons. And not all of that is a negative, because some of those species going extinct gave space for other species to be created. And so therefore today the planet is hosting this Grail. We're looking at it not in the sense of climate change. Now, I'm not a climate change denier. I totally believe in climate change, but when you go and you look at the history, climate is always changing. Climate is always moving. What is different about this period right now? Yes, it's sped up in a lot of different ways. But what is really causing that? We're talking about pollution, right? We're talking about the fact that we as a human species are polluting our own bodies. We're polluting the environments that we're in. We're creating a level of pollution that is accelerating and exasperating a natural evolutionary process. And that is the illness. The illness is our pollution, and our pollution of our minds in the way that we look at things and our mindset as being very fearful and negative. The pollution of our bodies in what we're eating, in the way that we're growing it, in what we're immersing ourselves in physically. And the pollution of our planet in how we're disposing of things, the lack of, of circular economy, all these different aspects. Pollution is the massive illness, and the planet is hosting it for us.